We're not talking about posting videos of Mickey Mouse out of costume here. We're talking about telling the World Wide Web that the cash gets taken out of the safe at 9 p.m. Considering the economy is poised to go to hell in a handbasket, let's discuss the concerning rise of people playing games with their full-time jobs. I cannot understate the popularity of day-in-the-life videos on short-form platforms like TikTok and Instagram Reels. Unlike in other categories of content creation that are dominated by full-time influencers, the most popular day-in-the-life creators work regular 9-to-5s and often center their content around their job. These short vlogs get millions of views and feature carefully curated snapshots of the life of a working professional. They're glamorous enough to be aspirational, yet down to earth and ordinary enough to feel attainable. People love watching what could be an alternate version of their life, where they wake up in a fancy studio.
The kind of blood that Tommy DeSimone and Jimmy Burke spilled was what organized crime is really all about.
Jimmy Burke was a legend in organized crime.
Charismatic, ruthless, paranoid, generous, and bloodthirsty. These are just some of the words that have been used to describe Jimmy Burke, a man who would go down in history as one of New York City's most infamous figures. Immortalized in the 1990 film Goodfellas, where he was portrayed by actor Robert De Niro, Jimmy was a complicated man, and at times seemed like an enigma to his criminal associates. He was known for his charming persona that he often used to mask his violent nature. As described by an associate at the time, Jimmy could look at you and smile, and you'd think you were sitting with your best friend in the world. Meanwhile, he's already got your grave dug. No one knew where they stood with him, just that if you crossed or displeased him in any way, he wouldn't hesitate to take you out, no matter what your relationship with him had been. Jimmy at one point even ordered the murder of his own best friend, who had provided him with an all-expenses-paid trip to Florida earlier that week. Now, while Goodfellas is regarded by many mob historians as largely accurate, much of Jimmy's life didn't make the final cut, and so today we'll take a deep dive into the rise and fall of Jimmy Burke. Jimmy was born with the name James Conway.
The Lufthansa heist, where almost $6 million in cash and jewels were stolen, has been immortalized in film thanks to Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, along with a few other smaller and lesser-known movies. But none of these works tell the full story about what happened on the early morning of December 11, 1978. In some films, multiple real-life people were combined into single characters and individual events were omitted. In Goodfellas, we don't even see the actual heist happen because the film is told from the perspective of Henry Hill and he was not involved with it. Here is what really happened during the heist and its bloody aftermath, where almost everyone that was part of the crew was either murdered or disappeared. But before we begin, please give this video a like if you enjoy it and click on the button to subscribe. The Castellammare War was the climatic event that transformed Italian immigrant street gangs into the national crime syndicate. In a sense, its tale tells the familiar story of the American experience, where a first generation comes to the country as poor adults, trying to carve a place for themselves in society, while their children become Americanized and integrate deeply into the system. But for the Mafia, their system is organized crime, and the story of how a group of poor Italian immigrants created an immensely wealthy criminal empire was a 40-year process. Join us as we explore how the Italian-American Mafia came into being. But before we begin, please like this video, comment on it, and make sure you subscribe. To best understand the Castellamarese War, it's best to start at the beginning of the events which led up to it. The Italian-American Mafia found its initial roots in New Orleans during the late 19th century. During that time, a Sicilian immigrant named Giuseppe Morello passed through that southern city before settling in New York in 1892. He made his home in the East Harlem neighborhood, which was transforming into an Italian enclave. Morello would Americanize himself by choosing the name Peter over Giuseppe. He was born in Corleone, Sicily, and it's believed that unlike the millions of his countrymen who came to the United States in search of a better life, he was instead fleeing to avoid a murder charge. Morello had relatives that were in the Sicilian Mafia, though at this point in the 19th century, they were little more than a loosely organized group of bandits. But their sophistication was evolving. Morello had a deformed right hand, which earned him the nickname of the Clutch. If he had hoped to make an honest life with his second chance in America, his disability must have made it difficult to find legitimate work. He did try different business ventures, like farming, a factory, and a saloon, but all failed. I'm not a big fan of blaming outside circumstances as the reason for why a person chooses to become bad, but it did seem like crime was the only thing he was really good at. Perhaps it's because he had a unique personality that made him smart, cunning, ruthless, and cruel. Being born in 1867 meant that he was 25 when he crossed the ocean to avoid a stiff prison sentence. It also meant that he spent his life, up to this point, surrounded by the mafia. His father died when he was 5 years old, and his mother remarried to a mafioso named Bernardo Terranova. This gave him a home education to the skills he would need to dominate the New York underworld, which he was going to create. After his first years of failure in the law-abiding world, his entire family crossed the ocean to join him. This included his wife, son, half-brothers and sisters, full sister, mother, and mafia stepfather. By 1897, Morello and his three half-brothers formed a gang called the 107th Street Mob. This gang would grow into the Morello crime family during the first decade of the 20th century, and it would eventually splinter into three of the five families of New York. But before 1900, they were just one street gang in a city full of others. So how did Giuseppe Morello, a handicapped man who wasn't capable of making an honest living, able to dominate the world of violent thugs? He did it by being more creative and more vicious than them. Given that Morello fled to the United States to avoid a murder charge, it would be easy to assume that he had experienced killing his rivals before he crossed the ocean. And so, he had no problem with adapting the strategy to be more violent than his violent rivals. And while he might have been a failed businessman, he did understand the power of branding. The 107th Street Gang's signature move after committing a murder was to dismember and stuff the body in a barrel. Sometimes these barrels would be buried or dumped in the ocean, but other times they were put in public places so that those who knew the goings of the criminal world would know that Morello was behind this death. While Giuseppe Morello was busy becoming the dominant force in East Harlem, to the south of him in the Little Italy neighborhood, a local crime lord named Ignazio the Wolf Lupo was consolidating his power as well. In any other story, these two powerhouses would become rivals of each other, but instead they became allies, and then family, through the marriage of Morello's half-sister to Lupo. The marriage ended up joining Morello and Lupo's gangs together to form the Morello crime family, with Giuseppe on the top and his brother-in-law as his underboss. Prohibition was the era that started making the mobsters filthy rich, but in 1903, the Volstead Act was still 16 years into the future. So the Morello family created what would become traditional mafia rackets in order to make money. They engaged in gambling, stealing, running numbers, running protection rackets, and running prostitution rings. They also proved themselves to be more sophisticated than other criminal organizations, as they were the first to pioneer the concept of laundering money. They established various legitimate businesses where they washed their criminal revenues to make it appear as if it was legally earned. During the 1900s, Giuseppe Morello began to be considered the boss of bosses in the New York criminal underworld due to the power and wealth he amassed. As his stature grew, so did his gang. Morello controlled East Harlem through his half-brothers, the Terranovas. In downtown New York City, he ruled through Ignazio Lupo. In the Bronx, his captain Gaetano Rina ran the crime rackets, while in Brooklyn and Queens, another capo, Salvatore D'Aquilo, handled the day-to-day operations. Joe Masseria was another powerful member in the family at this time, and he was rising into a leadership position, though he would be arrested in 1913 for robbery and spent part of the decade in prison. With his power at its pinnacle, he entered into an alliance with the powerful Sicilian mafia boss, Don Vito Cassioferra, and his insatiable greed caused him to enter into a new criminal enterprise: counterfeit money. The operation they ran was simple. Counterfeit US dollars were created in Sicily, and they were then shipped to the United States for Morello to distribute. During this period, the FBI was at its infancy, and the federal government was much smaller than it is today. But there was one established part of the government with decades of investigating experience when it came to fake cash: the Secret Service. They were founded in 1865, and their original mission, which they still carry out today, was to combat the counterfeiting of money. It didn't take long for them to track the new influx of counterfeit bills to Morello and Lupo in Manhattan. Both were arrested and found guilty. Morello received a 25-year sentence, while Lupo was set to do a 35-year stretch. The boss of bosses was removed from the streets. In his place, his half-brother Nicholas Terranova assumed leadership. At this point, membership in the Morello family was open to only those with exclusive Sicilian descent, and other Italians were viewed as foreigners. In Brooklyn, another group of organized criminals from Naples were creating their own home. They were called the Camorra, and they became rivals to the Morello family. In 1915, a war broke out between both groups that was deadly and destructive to both sides. Leader Nicholas Terranova would be killed in the fighting. Control of the family passed to the remaining two Terranova brothers, and they did their best to survive. The war ended with a tip to law enforcement that took the Camorra leadership off the streets and into prison. The organization fell apart, and the remaining members integrated into the mafia. But the Morello family victory was short-lived. In 1916, Joe Masseria was released from prison, and he was gaining power within the family to become his own force. Meanwhile, Gaetano Rina in the Bronx decided that he was not happy with the current state of management, and he declared his own independence in 1920, turning his large crew into his own family. The Terranova brothers' leadership was only weakened from here, while Salvatore D'Aquila and Joe Masseria's grew. Then at the end of the year, the chessboard changed when Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio Lupo were pardoned by the president and released back onto the streets. Another game changer now was prohibition. The outlawing of alcohol, while the public still wanted it, meant that anyone who controlled the black market of booze would become incredibly rich. The stakes were high in the underworld. D'Aquila decided his prestige would be seen as a threat to his old boss, and he decided to take Morello out before Morello could have him murdered. To achieve this, he decided that it would be best to kill Masseria first, so that way Morello's powerful lieutenant would not be a rival after the boss was gone. Former Camorra member Umberto Valentini was assigned to the murder. On August 9, 1922, 4 gunmen waited on 2nd Avenue in Manhattan to ambush and kill Masseria outside of his apartment. Masseria noticed his would-be killers just as they were about to shoot. He ran into a shop and dived for cover, while 4 men shot at him at point-blank range as he attempted to duck out of the way. The only damage to the man was a hole in his hat and a bullet skimming his jacket. This incident would later give Masseria a reputation as being able to dodge bullets. The gunmen, having failed in their mission, jumped into a waiting car and sped away. 2 days later, Valente was murdered as he tried to run away from a meeting that he realized was a setup. One of the shooters is said to be a young Charles Luciano. The exact details of the leadership of the family are hazy during the immediate period, but somewhere at this point, Masseria's power was becoming undeniable, while Morello's was past its prime. We'll never know how the arrangement
A Russian?
Well, to be technical, he's an Uzbekistanian, but